you. We have ASL interpretation today. Kaylee is our interpreter. Thank you so much, Kaylee, for being here. Please mute yourself if you have not done already. And as a last note, please save your questions until after the presentation. We'll have lots of time for questions and answers after the presentation. Okay, so to introduce myself, I'm Heather Anderson with the Office of City Planning. Our team manages the Percent for the Arts program for the city, and I am the project manager for ArtsBloom. We have a couple other people from the city here I want to introduce. Kevin, do you want to speak about yourself?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Kelly. I'm the manager of the Office of City Planning, and will be supporting Heather on this initiative.
And Johanna is here with us today as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Johanna Brennan, and I'm an attorney with the City Law Department, and I also will be helping Heather and Kevin with this project.
Thank you, Johanna. Okay, so oopsies. So just the general kind of order of today, I'm going to walk you through the request for proposals for ArtsBloom 2024. Take a brief moment to talk about lessons that we learned from the last round. Last year was our first year of ArtsBloom, so we went through this process last year. And then after that, we will be taking questions. So in order to qualify to apply for ArtsBloom, you can be an individual or a group. It's pretty open. Do not have to be a licensed business or MWBE certified or a nonprofit. It could just be a group of people with no kind of formal affiliation to one another. Individuals and groups do not have to have a fiscal sponsor or fiduciary, but you should consider whether you feel comfortable issuing checks. And by that, I mean, if you're a group or individual that will be managing a program or project, the city will be paying you for this program. Will you feel comfortable then issuing checks to artists or other people on your team that are doing the work? Individuals and groups can only have their name on one proposal. And to get, this is always more complicated, right, than at first blush. So there can be a scenario in which an individual is involved in more than one proposal. Say they might be applying as an individual on one proposal, but as part of an organization on another proposal, and that is okay. The main thing is that group or individual listed should not be on more than one application. Individuals and groups can only receive an ArtsBloom award once every 3 years. So anyone who was awarded ArtsBloom funding last year is not eligible this year. And we're really doing that to maximize opportunities for artists and arts organizations in the city. Oh, one last thing before we leave individuals and groups. City employees are eligible to apply, and they are eligible as long as what they do as part of their work is not the same kind of work that they would be doing for this project. So any city employees that are interested in this funding, please email me so that we can verify whether or not you would be eligible related to your current job position. So in order to qualify for ArtsBloom funding, there are a few eligibility criteria for the programming or projects. The first is that it must belong to one or more of these categories: arts education, literary arts, performing arts, and visual art, meaning a temporary visual art. They must also meet the following public benefit criteria. So the project or programming has to be located in the city of Rochester. And we're really highly recommending before people spend any time on an application that you verify with this website that the address you're looking at having a programming or a project is within city boundaries. People get confused because there are zip codes that are in the city of Rochester, as well as, say, Brighton or Henrietta, or a neighboring town or village. But you really need to check this website. And I'll show you here. This is what the website looks like. And you can enter an address here. And if it comes up in the map, then that means it's within the city boundaries. If it's not within city boundaries, it will say this address is not found here. And the second public benefit criteria is that the project or programming must be free to participants or audiences, or feature a free or low cost component. The qualifying art programming and projects must take place between July 1st, 2024 and June 30th, 2025. That's our fiscal year. So that's the year that we have that this funding must be spent. That's why we put those timeline parameters around it. And the last criteria for qualifying programming and projects is that it must align with one or both of the ArtsBloom goals. So the goals of this funding are to reach historically underserved residents in the city and provide paid opportunities for local artists and or small arts organizations in Rochester. And again, when we're saying local artists, local arts organizations, we're talking about those who live or have a studio in the city, within city boundaries. So here's a list of ineligible programming or projects. For example, we want to highlight a couple. So anything that's permanent visual art. So a sculpture that has a permanent attachment is in a concrete slab. That is not eligible for this kind of funding. We actually have a different type of funding under Percent for the Arts that does fund what we call capital or permanent art. So that is a different funding type. It does not, murals are not eligible for a similar reason. We consider murals permanent art. And then a big one here is that anything that's being funded through special events funding at the city, that's a type of city funding, is not eligible for ArtsBloom. So if you are considering one or the other, please know you can only receive one of those. So this year, the ArtsBloom application is an online form. If you would prefer a hard copy or to submit a digital application as a PDF or Word document, you can do that. Please email me and ask me for that, and I will get it to you. Here are the different categories in the application. I'm going to make a few notes along the way to highlight just important points as you're filling out the application. As a side note, I want to say the online form, because it's broken up into section, you cannot see all of the questions at once. If you'd prefer to have the questions in advance so that you can draft your responses before filling out the online application, again, email me and I will email you with all of the questions. So applicant information, I want to reiterate here that you as an applicant do not have to be located in the city of Rochester. Your organization does not have to be located in the city of Rochester. We're really talking about the event, the programming, or the project is what's required to be in the city of Rochester. And when you're filling out the basic information for your project or program, want to note that we expect that your programming or project might fit more than one of the categories. Feel free to check as many as it fits. You're not going to get more points if it fits more than one category. Just want to make sure you know. We understand that some projects are actually more than one category. and you will have to fill out, select one funding request amount. So the funding request amounts available are $5,000, $10,000, and $20,000. The eligibility questions section is a pretty important section, as if you answer no to any of these 3 questions, it means your project or program is not eligible. In the project or programming details section, we ask for a date or range of dates and the location. We want you to know it's okay if you don't have a set date or location yet. In particular, for programming and projects happening in 2025, we understand that it might be far in advance for you to have that set, but we do need to know that you can commit to having the programming or project happen before June 30th, 2025, and that you're committed to having it within the city. We also are happy to help with locations if you'd like that. So city locations, libraries, our centers, city locations in general, we can obviously help you with scheduling your programming for a city location if that would be helpful. Feel free to let us know that in your application. So the public benefit section, as I mentioned, there's public benefit criteria because this is really public art, right? So this is how we know that this is public art. The first question you will notice is that we actually are doing bonus points for programming that serve youth or projects that have a youth component this year. This is really aligned with the mayor's emphasis on supporting youth and youth development. You also will have to answer information about whether it is free or whether your event or programming has a free or low cost component. If it's a low cost component or low cost, you will have to include all known details, including what the cost would be without ArtsBloom funding. Programming is eligible if it's considered sliding scale or optional donation, but please note we will only consider it that way if it is marketed as such, and the city will require marketing proof that it has been marketed as sliding scale or optional donation. The last 2 questions in the public benefit section are: describe how the proposal aligns with one or both of the ArtsBloom goals. That's a very important question to spend some time with. Those are listed in RFP, and I did review those earlier in the presentation. It doesn't have to align with both, but it needs to at least one. And I will say that projects and programming that align with both goals are going to score higher than those that align with only one. And similarly, projects or programming that are free typically score higher than those that have a low cost component or have a free component and aren't completely free. The last question of this section is: describe any other public benefits your project or programming will provide. We want to allow space for you to tell us about other public benefits that your programming or project might have that we didn't think about. There was a lot of that discussion with last year's proposals, which is great. Unfortunately, with last year's proposals, a lot of people focused on the public benefits that they felt their project had, and they didn't really describe the alignment with ArtsBloom goals. So we wanted to provide a separate space for that for folks. In the budget, in the RFP, it's listed the few things that we want in addition to the application, on the online application. We list pretty explicitly what we want in the budget. So we're going to review that here with you today. We want you to pay attention to that, and please include all of these things. In your budget, we're looking for all known expenses, including hourly rates for staffing, all sources of funding. So if there's funding besides ArtsBloom that is going into paying for your program or project, please include those sources of funding. Then be clear about, if you have multiple sources of funding, what expenses the ArtsBloom funding will cover. And then lastly, if there is a cost for participant and audiences, include what expenses that cost will cover. We're really expecting that if you have a cost, you need that money to cover some part of the program or project, and we want to know what that is. This is not an explicit requirement in the RFP, but generally, as a general rule, we do not really like administrative fees to exceed 20% of the budget. So a proposal will not score as high if the administrative fee exceeds 20% of the budget. In the experience section of the online application, you'll find 2 places to upload images or links related to your experience or the experience of the project and programming from the past. Please, for each of those, we're asking that you upload for each of those as a single file. And what we mean by that is please put all your images and any links you have to work in one PDF or Word document and submit it as one file. You're really going to be doing us a favor if you do that. In the past, we have had applications that end up being 20, 25 different files, and it becomes very cumbersome. It also increases the potential for human error on our side if we have to juggle that many files. So please do both of us a favor by having all of those in one PDF to submit online. The last section of the online application is about programming project teams. So this is really where we're getting to know. In the previous section, we were talking about experience, your particular experience, and the experience, any experience you've had with this programming or project. With this last section, we're getting to know the full team and their experience. We're also checking for workforce goals bonus points, as well as NWBE bonus points, which we only are awarding to funding requests of $20,000. So here is the evaluation criteria. This is listed in the full RFP. Please, as a side note, review the full request for proposals before you fill out the online application. You will improve your online application if you have a full understanding of this. And this is an example of what you get to see as part of the RFP. We have the evaluation criteria listed out with a description of what we're going to be looking for each of these criteria. But they include proposal quality, proposal budget. So we're going to be looking for all those things we're asking for in the budget, public benefit, experience, and then the bonus points categories. So youth, there's a city location. The city actually awards bonus points for consultants that are located or have an office in the city. And then again, workforce goals, bonus points, and MWBE bonus points for $20,000 requests. So as I mentioned, we have some from lessons learned from last year, and we found that there were some common proposal issues last year. Last year, we received 56 proposals, so it was a very competitive round. But what we found were that a lot of proposals had a lack of clarity in project description. So please take time with your project description in your application. A lot of proposals had issues with budget. They either had no budget or they had an error in budget, where things like their total budget request and the budget might have actually not matched the funding request in the application. That's one example. Or things might not have added up correctly in the budget. Or there was an incomplete budget. For example, the budget didn't show what the cost to participants and audiences would cover. So again, if you have a cost to your programming or project, we need to see that reflected in the budget. If it's not, then it's an incomplete budget. Another common issue was not enough information to show how well the proposal met ArtsBloom goals. So keep in mind when we're talking about reaching historically underserved neighborhoods, tell us, how is your programming or project reaching underserved residents? And how is your project or programming providing economic opportunities for artists that live or work in the city or arts organizations that are located in the city? And then lastly, many performing arts proposals relied on their event being free to satisfy reaching underserved residents goal. Now, this is largely because we had a competitive round. I think it's safe to assume we're going to have another competitive round. So this is something to keep in mind. If you have a performing arts proposal and your performing arts event will be free, please know that there will be other proposers that are going above and beyond that to show how they're reaching underserved residents. So if there are a lot of performing arts proposals, it's not going to necessarily be enough to say it's free. Location will be helpful. If it's located in an underserved community, that's definitely going to show that that's aligned with the goal. But if you can show how you're going to connect underserved residents with, say, the tickets for the show or in marketing the show, that's going to be helpful. And lastly here, I do want to say we are working on a process document, a document that kind of summarizes our process from last round of ArtsBloom that we will be releasing soon. And I will make sure all of you who have emailed me, everyone who's registered for this meeting and anyone who has emailed me about ArtsBloom 2024 will get access to that document. We'll also post it online for everyone to access. But I want to make sure people who have showed interest in this in particular will have access to it. And here's our timeline for ArtsBloom 2024. The next deadline after this is our deadline for questions. So you must submit, if you have questions that you would like us to answer, you must submit them by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, March 24th. And then we will circulate responses to all questions received, including questions that we receive in this information session, by March 28th. That will be posted on the RFP webpage, on our City Arts webpage, and emailed to all those registered for this meeting. And the reason we do that, the reason we have a deadline for questions is to really have an equitable process. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask questions, but that also everyone has access to all that information, to full information in advance of the deadline enough to really improve their own opportunity for the application. Proposals are due 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, April 14th. I want to throw out there, please give yourself time in advance. Think about, you may have technical issues. In the past, there may be a handful of people in Percent for the Arts funding applications who did not make a deadline because they had technical issues that night. So they might have been traveling and had technical issues, or there was a storm where they were and there were technical issues. Please plan for those issues in advance and try to do it in advance so that you can work out any technical issues you have and not miss the deadline because of that. After RFP review, we expect that we will be notifying folks of our decision the week of May 13th. Okay, now that completes my presentation. If you have any questions, please type your questions in the chat box and we will read them out and answer them in the order that we receive them. While we are waiting for folks.
Can we just ask on screen?
Yes,
It's so much easier to not have to type what I want to say.
Yes, and since no one is typing in the chat box, we'll go ahead and let you do that. I do want to point out, I just dropped the link to the RFP webpage
Great.
in the chat, so you have easy access to that. And go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
So I'm representing Garth Fagan Dance along with the Executive Director, Natalie Rogers Cropper, who is also on screen. So Natalie, if you want to add any follow-up to this question, Natalie and I have discussed this. It's regarding the MBWE/workforce goals of the city. As I know we would like to apply for the $20,000 application. And we know it's, there are a lot of, I don't know what the exact word is, but there are a lot of benefits for a profit-making group to apply if they have the MWBE features. So we work with, primarily when we contract with people of color, Black, African heritage, and women. But probably very few of them have gone through the certification process. So is there any benefit in our proposal to saying to you, these are the African heritage Black specialist consultants we work with on this project? Would we get any points for that in any way?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually what the workforce goals are about. The workforce goals are really to encourage diversity in contracting without the MWBE certification, because we
Sweet.
understand that a lot of small organizations or independent artists are not MWBE certified. And so we want to encourage diversity outside of that, right? Because MWBE certification isn't even accessible to everyone. Nonprofits can't be MWBE certified. So
Right.
the application does include questions about the project team and the demographics of the project team so that we can get that information and know if you would be awarded workforce goals bonus points in the review of your application.
So a follow-up to that is, do you believe that in your guidelines for this grant program, do you believe nonprofits can be competitive for the $20,000 category?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have to say, and we're relatively new at managing arts funding, but in our 3 or 4 rounds now, we have found very few applicants to be MWBE certified. It's not very frequent that we have state certified MWBE applicants.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Heather.
Yeah.
Natalie,
You're
do you have any follow-up to that?
I have my question. Thank you, Heather. Encouraging.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so we got a few questions in the chat. Kathleen asked, is the Fringe Festival an event that receives city funding? If the Fringe event is ticketed, does that qualify it? So I believe that Fringe Festival receives special events funding, which would mean that it would not be eligible for ArtsBloom funding, but we can follow up with you on that, Kathleen.
Heather, let me just double check. Was that, did that question come to you as a direct message? Because I don't see that in the chat.
Oh, yes, it is.
Okay, just a logistical note, when we finish the recording here, I'm not sure if it will capture questions that are sent directly to you since I'm doing the recording. So
Right.
folks, I just mentioned in the chat, folks, if you want to enter your question in the chat, as some have done, we'll tackle those one by one. If you'd like to do as Vivian just did and ask your question live, you're welcome to do that. We would just ask that you raise your hand. But in any case, please don't message Heather directly, because we won't be able to preserve that question in the chat, and we want to include this in the summary of questions that were submitted. So hopefully that's clear.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sure.
Wondering if I can apply for a youth dance program and gymnastics as part of the program. So can you, let's see, Adria, so you're asking about applying for a dance program. Are you asking whether the gymnastics would be eligible for the ArtsBloom funding? Whether the gymnastics portion of that program would be eligible? Is that the question?
Can you hear me?
I could hear you there, yeah.
Okay. I'm asking, I would like to apply for a youth dance program, and I would like to incorporate gymnastics as well.
I believe that would be eligible. So you're saying the gymnastics would be within the dance class? There'd be some kind of tumbling components to the dance class?
Correct. It'll probably be different days. But yes.
I believe that would be eligible. Kevin, Johanna, do you have any insight into that or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think there's obviously a fuzzy line in some cases between the arts and sports. And this would be an interesting one. So I think as long as it's really clear in what you're proposing, that this is really an artistic endeavor that can certainly have athletic elements to it that some might consider sports, as long as it's clearly an artistic endeavor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, a really good description of what your program is that you're proposing will help us a lot to ensure that it is, primarily an arts related project rather than a sports related project. So, but it sounds interesting. So tell us about it.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think too, I will say, keep in mind your audience, right? There's going to be a review panel looking at this, and it's going to be compared with potentially other dance proposals, right? So keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you're communicating it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next question. How/where do I find guidelines for special projects funding? So is this related to, hang on, I have to close. I can't see this.
Yeah, she was referring to special events funding. So I included the link to special events funding if that's the funding source that folks are interested in.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure.
Thank
Okay,
you.
can I use the grant for equipment, studio overhead, uniforms, shoes, pay myself, dance instructors? Great question. So let me review all of this. So I think that this all sounds, and Kevin and Johanna can also jump in here, but in reviewing last year's proposals, all these things were aligned with what we felt qualified for ArtsBloom funding. The main thing when you're thinking about different expenses, the main thing that we took issue with and could not justify is basically capital improvements. So if you're in a space and you want to do a renovation of your space to enable the kind of programming that you would be applying for, that's not what this funding is for. This funding is not for renovating a building or doing construction projects. Johanna, Kevin, were there any other, since we're on the topic, were there any other expenses you can think of that we saw that we determined were not eligible and would be helpful to bring up here? I feel like there's one other one. Oh, there were a couple proposals that were businesses that the expenses seemed more like inventory expenses than actually supporting some kind of project or programming. That was another example of a type of ineligible expense. But Johanna and Kevin, anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I can't think of anything specific, but again, what's really important is that the budget that you submit describe, what you're proposing to spend the money on and how that specifically relates to the project. So, we might even be a little suspicious of some equipment that is only going to be used for, a couple of months for your project, but, it looks like this is you trying to find ways to pay for equipment that's going to be used for other things. But just describe it carefully in the budget, and we will give you the benefit of the doubt in most cases.
Yeah, that's all I can think of as well. But certainly if anyone isn't sure about something, they can email Heather and ask her directly with the example that you're thinking of.
Thank you. Okay, next question. You mentioned that individuals and groups can only receive ArtsBloom funding every 3 years. Does this include nonprofit organizations as well? It does. It includes everyone. So anyone who received an ArtsBloom award last year is not eligible for this year or for the year after. Okay, let's see. Next question, is special events funding available every year? For example, if an org receives funding in 2025, may it apply again, 2024, may it apply again in 2025? We can we do not manage the special events funding. Kevin, can you put the special events funding webpage link in the chat?
Yeah, it's up above under Allison's question.
That's right. That's right. Sorry. Yeah,
But-
so it typically comes out annually. It's an annual thing. I think that's released sometime in the beginning of the year. Our special events office manages that. And so you should reach out to them with any questions you have about special events funding. Okay. What is the city's definition of small arts organization? Budget size, unclear based on last year's recipients. Oh, that's a good question. Oh, that's a good question. Kevin, Johanna, do you have any thoughts on that? The question is about the ArtsBloom goals. So one of the ArtsBloom goals says, right, economic opportunities for local artists and small arts organizations. Do we have some threshold for small arts organization? We have not developed that, so I think we should take a look at that and we can get back to you all with a response on that question. Does that make sense, Johanna, Kevin?
Yeah, you're right. We haven't thought about that specifically as far as numbers. I mean, it's sort of like we know it when we see it kind of at this point, but yeah, maybe we can clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think for now, because it's not in the RFP, in the interest of fairness to everybody that might want to apply, and because it doesn't specifically lay out a threshold, we would just ask you to consider, you know, the spirit of that requirement. So if you're on the extreme end of the spectrum, the largest arts institution in town, you know that we're not saying you're ineligible, but you're very unlikely to meet the goals of this program. But if you're kind of a medium-sized organization or smaller, you know, you're definitely eligible and you'd be considered. And we would just, you know, compare all of these submissions against each other with that in mind. And then in future years, we might consider being more concrete about that threshold if that's helpful.
I think that's a great approach. We didn't, for this RFP, we didn't lay out a bright line threshold. So there won't be a bright line threshold, but it will be something that is considered by the panelists, right? So yeah, that's great. Okay, next question. May we include 2 different events in our application? Absolutely. One of the awarded projects from last year was to fund 3 separate events. So that's definitely, we've definitely seen that, and that's definitely okay. Let's see, next question. What's the question? If we already receive special events funding from the city, can we apply for ArtsBloom funding in the same time period? Sorry if this was already answered. This is my question. We are receiving funding in April 2024 for our Eclipse Festival, but want to apply to ArtsBloom for an exhibition opening in December 2024. Okay, so Johanna, Kevin, feel free to chime in here, but really, I think what we're looking at is if your event is being funded by special events funding, it's not eligible for ArtsBloom funding. So in this scenario, if you're saying you're receiving special events funding for the Eclipse Festival, but you would be applying for ArtsBloom for an event in December, then that would be okay. You would be eligible to apply for that funding. Johanna, Kevin, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, and just to clarify, Kendra, the funding that you received, was that in fact for from special events?
Yes, it was from special events.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree. If it's a completely different project, a completely different proposal from what you have, what's being funded by special events, you would be eligible. Absolutely.
And it's a different fiscal year too.
Yeah, that actually is true too.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for that clarifying question, Kendra. I think that's, yeah, very helpful. Okay, next question. Do you offer one-on-one help, mentor, any assistance with filling out the grant application? I've always had a hard time getting approved, even after going to several grant writing workshops. So the challenge here is providing support in an equitable manner. So providing support to all folks and making sure that everyone has access to the same support. And that's why we have these things set up the way they are. So for instance, we give this information session, we post the information session so that anyone who wasn't able to attend can watch it later. And then we accept questions up to a certain deadline so that everyone has access to asking a question, and then answer all those questions in one document and share it with anyone who is interested so that everyone has access to that same information. So we've gotten this question a couple of times, right? Why don't we take phone calls? Why don't we give one-on-one assistance? And it's really because we would be preferencing the people that had access to those sessions or that support. So we understand and sympathize for folks really wanting to get assistance, and but this is the most equitable way we can do this is the way that we have it set up. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you have to make sure that we answer all those questions and you get all the information that you need for your application. Johanna, Kevin, you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay. Does the 20% administrative expense include a permanent staff member? Does the 20% administrative expense include allocation of a permanent staff member's time for leading the project, or may compensation be a separate line item? So the 20%, the administrative fee can be a permanent staff member. It doesn't have to be, but it can. Include allocation of permanent staff members' time. May compensation be a separate line item? Allison, do you want to, I'm having a hard time with the second
Yeah,
question with,
so the
yeah.
question is, if there's a project that falls under the leadership of a permanent staff member, just as an example, a youth education through the arts project, and our youth education director allocates approximately 15% of her time to leading that project. In addition, we employ local artists, teaching artists. May I stipulate her time as a separate line item, and then in the 20% include everything else, like occupancy and, you know, everything, all the overhead items that an organization in the ordinary course of business incurs?
Yes, and all of those things should not exceed 20% of the budget.
Right, so I get
Right.
that. So it would be legitimate to have a line item for the 15% of the youth education director's compensation, and then 20% for everything else, to be clear.
So the administrator's fee should be part of the 20% admin fee cap.
Okay, but she's also a curator. She's not,
Right.
she's not, I understand administration to be back office, not hands-on program curation, supervision, iterative interaction with the artists delivering the project, that sort of thing. It seems to me those are separate functions.
Sure, they can be, you're welcome to have them be separate line items. We definitely want to have as much detail as possible. Also keep in mind that some of the things you might be thinking of as admin, for instance, if you're talking about an art class, materials for the art class would not be admin fees, right? Materials
Right,
for the
I understand
class.
that. Yeah, I
Okay,
get
great,
that.
great.
I'm talking about these general operational expenses, like your rent and your
Yeah,
utilities.
we definitely would love to have multiple, however many line items that works out to be. is great, because the more detail, the better for us, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, here's a great question. What is considered low cost for ticket price? So we don't have a threshold for that, because we have to kind of weigh what the program or project is, what the benefits of that program or project is compared to the cost. And that's going to be a challenge for the panel review every time, right? It was a challenge last round. It's going to be a challenge this time. It's something important for you all to keep in mind. I will say that last year, out of 56 proposals, the vast majority of proposals were for free programming and projects. So there were only a handful of projects that had a low cost or a low cost component. And that's worth noting there, to keep that in mind when you're putting together your proposal.
And also, as Heather mentioned earlier, just to reinforce this point, that among all of those that had a free cost for their events, some stood out more than others, because it wasn't just simply being free was the way to reach underserved populations. They went above and beyond that to try and connect with folks and reach out to different communities to advertise that. So you want to consider that when you're putting your proposals together.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, it looks like we have one last question here. I lead after-school improv classes / workshops for youth with a focus on building confidence, honing social skills, fostering teamwork, using improv to support literacy, etc. I'm currently working through several libraries and schools. While I have a few expenses for supplies, copying, printing pages when we're writing, some art supplies, my expense is primarily my time, facilitating, planning, driving, etc. Am I eligible to apply? So yes, you are eligible to apply. I think that, let me see. I think that the important thing in your proposal, Joanne, is going to be separating out the time that you spend leading the classes and workshops. That time is really your teaching time. So that's not really admin time, if that makes sense. That's your time that you're actually, is your staffing time for these kind of arts education, arts classes. Having said that, if there, you know, if there's, there might be, if there's a larger context of the program that you can put this in, there, we recognized last round that there is the potential for the ArtsBloom funding, might be a large portion of what you're applying for might be for admin fees, because the admin fees is 20% of a much larger budget. So please give us that larger project budget if that's the case. And all that aside, even if it's going to be more than 20% admin fees, you're still welcome to apply. Just keep in mind those things, that you want to give the full context, and that in competition with other proposals, it might not score as well if you can't really paint that picture about what the fuller context is. Does that answer your question, Joanne?
It does. Thank you. I have these two ideas together. And so when you said you can have two events in the same proposal, I think that kind of pinged, because one is a much more literary, hands-on, the kids work with tangible art supplies and materials and produce something, which is much more expense heavy than me showing up after school to lead play, even though it's a valuable thing. You know, it's just me showing up. It's just my time. So thank you. That does clarify very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. As that reminds me too, that there, one of the questions came up about marketing costs, because for some of these things, there's a marketing cost. Feel free to include marketing cost. We encourage people to, you know, have money towards getting the word out about a program or project. But that's another one that there might be situations where the marketing cost is kind of high. And if it is, if you have a high marketing cost as part of your project, it doesn't make you ineligible, but please just paint the picture, right? Break it down as much as possible and really paint the picture of the full context of the project to let us know what's going on. Okay, so that's great. It's 11:54. There are no more questions in the chat box. I want to remind you the next deadline is 11:59 p.m. Sunday, March 24th for any additional, all of your questions, basically. Was one more question popped up. So I'll go ahead and we have time. I want to apply for musical artists and a kids art table to use recyclables to create art at our EcoFest this year. Are these two items eligible for funding? So musical artists and a kids art table to use recyclables to create. So yes, mostly yes. I want to kind of call back to what Johanna mentioned in our conversation earlier, that the table in particular, if a the more things like that a proposal has, so the more items that you are putting in a budget that are actually going to be things that you keep and that support your organization or your group long term, that's a little less likely to be covered by ArtsBloom than things like artist time and materials for the project that's happening right now. So it is eligible, but just keep that in mind. Okay, so yes, deadline for questions is next. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate connecting with you all and putting some faces to names. I've been in email contact with some of you. McClurg, I'm looking at you. It's good to see you, good to put a face to a name. And I look forward to continued conversations. Thank you all so much. Please continue to email me questions and have a great rest of your Monday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee.